The screaming started at exactly 6:47 in the evening. Not the screaming of fear, not yet, but the screaming of mothers calling their children inside, of fishermen abandoning their nets mid-catch, of vendors slamming shutters closed with such force that wood splintered under their hands. In Morwen's Bay, you had 13 minutes. 13 minutes from the first toll of the warning bell to get yourself behind locked doors, windows covered, every crack sealed. Because at dusk, when the sun kissed the horizon and the sky bled purple and gold, they came. The shadow dwellers. And if they found you outside, you simply ceased to exist. Not dead, there were no bodies, no blood, no evidence you'd ever drawn breath except for the pile of empty clothes left crumpled in the street where you'd stood. Marissa found out the hard way on a Tuesday in October, 3 years into the curse. She'd been carrying her daughter's birthday cake, rushing home from the baker's, when her shoelace came untied. Just a shoelace. She bent to fix it at 6:59, and by 7 o'clock, her daughter was screaming at a pile of her mother's clothes in the middle of Harbor Street, the birthday cake smashed beside it, chocolate frosting mixing with the first evening rain. That was Morwen's Bay now. 400 people living in a prison of their own homes, watching the sun's descent like condemned prisoners watching the gallows being built. The curse had started simple enough, the way most curses do, with arrogance and a broken taboo. A merchant woman from the inland cities had arrived that spring, her carriage laden with silks and contempt for coastal superstition. Old grandmother Bissett, who'd seen 83 winters and knew the old ways, had warned her. Never whisper your true name to your reflection in the sacred tide pools at dusk, she'd said, her voice carrying the weight of generations. The barrier between worlds grows thin there. The shadows listen. They hunger. The merchant woman had laughed, actually laughed, her voice ringing across the market square. You people need schools, not ghost stories, she'd said, and that evening, she'd walked to the tide pools just to prove the old woman wrong. She'd knelt at the largest pool, leaned close to her reflection in the darkening water, and whispered her birth name, the one her mother had given her, the one that held power. The water had turned black as ink. Tendrils of living shadow had risen from the depths, wrapped around her throat, her waist, her ankles, and pulled. Her scream had cut off halfway through, and by the time the first villagers arrived, there was nothing left but her expensive leather shoes and the fading ripples on the water's surface. The shadows had been hunting ever since. For 3 years, Morwen's Bay had bled. 52 souls taken. 52 families shattered. Oracle Meridwen, the spiritual leader who'd guided Morwen's Bay for 40 years, performed ritual after ritual. She burned sage and blessed salt. She chanted in the old tongue until her voice went hoarse. Nothing worked. The shadows came every evening without fail, and every evening, someone was too slow, too careless, too unlucky. Welcome to African Folklore Stories. Hey everyone, please tell us where you're watching from in the comments and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Your support makes all the difference for us to keep creating these emotional stories. But while the village cowered and died, there was one couple who carried a different kind of pain. Torin the boat builder had hands like weathered oak, scarred from 40 years of working with wood and sea. His wife Alara made sails that caught the wind like prayers, tight weaves that never tore, stitching so perfect it looked like art. They'd been married 8 years, and for 6 of those years, they'd visited Oracle Meridwen's temple once a month to pray for a child. We're not getting younger, Alara would whisper, kneeling before the altar with tears streaming down her face. She was 34, and every month that passed felt like another door closing. Then, in the 7th year of their marriage, in the 3rd year of the curse, it happened. Alara was working on a sail when the world tilted sideways. The village healer examined her and smiled for the first time in months. You're with child, she'd said simply, and Alara had burst into tears right there on the examination table. Torin had spun her around their cottage when she told him, both of them laughing and crying, 8 years of hope finally answered. They'd started preparing immediately. Torin built a cradle from the finest wood he had, carving little boats and fish into the headboard. Alara sewed tiny clothes. They argued happily about names. They dared to hope. But hope in Morwen's Bay had become a dangerous luxury. The first 9 months passed normally enough. But then came the 10th month. Then the 11th. Alara's belly continued to grow, but no baby came. Ruth the healer examined her weakly, her frown deepening each time. The heartbeat is strong, she'd say, pressing her ear to Alara's swollen belly. The baby is healthy. But I don't understand why. The 10th month arrived, and market vendors began to whisper when Alara waddled past. 10 months, they'd mutter. That's not natural. The 11th month came, and the whispers turned hostile. Demon seed, someone hissed as Alara tried to buy vegetables. The 12th month arrived, and the hostility became open aggression. A group of villagers surrounded Alara in the market square, their faces twisted with fear and anger. What's growing inside you? A woman demanded, jabbing a finger at Alara's enormous belly. No human child takes 12 months. It's evil. Torin had appeared like a storm, shoving his way through the crowd. He'd grabbed the woman's finger, his face inches from hers. Say one more word about my wife, he'd growled, his voice low and deadly. Just one. I'm begging you. The village guard had to intervene. The 13th month came and Alara could barely move. Torin stopped going to the workshop. He stayed home, watching over her with fear eating at his insides. What if they're right? Alara whispered one night, tears streaming down her face. What if something is wrong? Torin had held her face in his hands, forcing her to meet his eyes. Then we love it anyway, he'd said fiercely. Whatever comes out, it's ours. In desperation, they'd gone to Oracle Meridwen. The old woman had examined Alara with gentle hands that had delivered countless babies over 4 decades. She'd performed divination with bones and shells, her eyes closed in concentration. When she'd finally opened them, there'd been something like wonder in her face. The child is healthy, she'd said slowly. More than healthy. Strong. Powerful, even. Torin had leaned forward, desperate. Then why? Why 13 months? Oracle Meridwen had smiled, sad and knowing. Because this child is being prepared. The gods don't work on our schedule, Torin. Their timing is perfect, even when we can't understand it. She placed a weathered hand on Alara's belly, and the baby had kicked so hard all 3 of them had felt it. Your daughter, the oracle had whispered, will be extraordinary. But. She'd looked up at them, her old eyes serious. Promise me something. No matter what the village says, no matter how she appears, you will love her. Protect her. Because I sense the gods are testing us all with this child. They'd promised, though they hadn't understood. Not then. The birth came on a night when storms raged so violently that waves crashed over the harbor wall and lightning turned the sky white. Alara's labor started at sunset, contractions that made her scream so loudly Torin feared every shadow in Morwen's Bay would hear. He'd run through the storm to fetch Ruth the midwife. She'd followed him reluctantly, her face tight with disapproval. The labor lasted 6 hours. 6 hours of Alara screaming, of Ruth barking instructions, of Torin holding his wife's hand so tightly he left bruises. The baby crowned just as lightning struck a tree near the cottage, the thunder so loud it shook the walls. And then, at exactly midnight, at the 13th stroke of the clock tower, the baby was born. A girl. She came into the world screaming with healthy lungs, her cry cutting through the storm. Ruth wrapped her quickly in a clean blanket, preparing to hand her to Alara. Then she saw the baby's hair, and she stumbled backward. Gods preserve us, Ruth whispered, her face going pale. The baby's hair was like nothing that had ever existed in Morwen's Bay, or anywhere else in the known world. It wasn't blonde or brown or black or red. It was silver and shadow, woven together in impossible spirals. Strands of pure, luminescent silver twisted around strands of deep, liquid black, the 2 colors braiding naturally as if they'd been painted by an artist's hand. In the lamplight, the hair seemed to shimmer with an inner light, each strand catching and reflecting the glow. And as they watched, holding their breath, the hair began to emit a soft, gentle radiance, a silvery blue glow that pushed back the darkness of the storm-racked night. Ruth backed toward the door. This is no natural child, she'd gasped. This is sorcery. Torin had moved faster than he'd ever moved in his life. He'd stepped between Ruth and his wife, his face transformed into something dangerous. Get out. His voice had been quiet, but it carried enough threat to make Ruth flinch. People need to know, Ruth had protested. Torin had advanced on her, his fists clenched. Get out of my house, or I swear to every god that listens, you will regret it. Ruth had fled into the storm. He turned back to find Alara holding the baby, tears streaming down her face, but they were tears of joy. The baby had stopped crying and was looking up at her mother with eyes that were perfectly normal, beautiful and dark and aware. She's perfect, Alara had whispered, running a gentle finger across the baby's cheek. She's absolutely perfect. Torin had knelt beside the bed, looking at his daughter for the first time, really looking at her. The hair was strange, yes. Impossible, certainly. But the face was beautiful. The eyes were alert and intelligent. The tiny fingers that wrapped around his thumb were perfect and human, and his. Seren, he'd said softly, the name coming to him fully formed. We'll call her Seren. It means star in the old tongue. Alara had smiled through her tears. Seren. Yes. Our little star. They'd held their daughter as the storm raged outside, her strange hair casting a gentle glow across their faces, and for that one perfect moment, they'd been happy. But morning was coming, and with it, the judgment of Morwen's Bay. By dawn, everyone knew. Ruth had told her sister. Her sister had told the baker. By the time the sun was fully up, a crowd had gathered in the market square, voices rising in angry confusion. 13 months and that's what came out, someone shouted. It's a demon child, another voice cried. The Elder Council convened an emergency session. Aldrich the Stern, who'd led the council for 20 years, stood before the assembled villagers with his arms crossed. He was a tall man with iron-gray hair and eyes that never seemed to blink. We need to discuss the boat builder's situation, he'd said carefully. A child born after 13 months, with hair that glows in the dark. This could be connected to our curse. Oracle Meridwen had stood up so fast her chair had toppled backward. This child is a blessing, not a curse, she'd shouted. You're speaking out of fear and ignorance. But Aldrich had held up his hand for silence. We will watch and wait, he'd declared. But if there is any sign that this child brings harm, we will take action. 7 days after Seren's birth, something impossible happened. Oracle Meridwen had gone to perform the evening watch, as she did every night. But when she'd reached her clifftop temple and looked down at the village, the shadows hadn't come. She'd waited, her heart pounding. 6:47 came and went. 7 o'clock passed. The sun set completely, and the village should have been under siege. But the streets remained empty of shadows. For the first time in 3 years, the shadow hour didn't come. Meridwen had performed a divination immediately, her hands shaking. The message was clear, the curse had lifted. The barrier had been restored. She'd run down to the village and burst into the market square where people were cautiously emerging from their homes, confused by the absence of shadows. It's over, she'd cried, her voice breaking with joy and relief. The curse is broken. The shadows are gone. The village had erupted into chaos, people crying, embracing, falling to their knees in gratitude. 3 years of terror ended in a moment. The celebration had gone on all night. People danced in the streets for the first time since the curse began. They lit bonfires. They sang. They laughed until their sides hurt. And through it all, Torin and Alara stood at the edge of the square, holding their 7-day-old daughter, watching with cautious hope. Do you think? Alara had started, but couldn't finish. Torin had looked down at Seren, who was sleeping peacefully in her mother's arms, her silver-black hair glowing softly in the firelight. 7 days ago, she was born. 7 days later, the curse ends. That's not coincidence. He'd looked up at the celebrating crowd. Should we tell them? Alara had shaken her head slowly. Would they believe us? Look at how they still watch us. How they avoid coming near. It was true. Even in their joy, the villagers gave the small family a wide berth. People would glance at them, see the glowing-haired baby, and quickly look away. Across the square, Oracle Meridwen had caught Torin's eye. She'd nodded slowly, understanding passing between them. But she hadn't said anything either. Sometimes truth spoken too soon falls on deaf ears. If you're enjoying this story so far, please hit that like button and drop a comment telling us what you think will happen next. Your engagement means everything to us. The years that followed were brutal. When Seren was 3 years old, she'd toddle into the market square where other children played, holding out a toy boat Torin had carved for her. "Play," she'd ask in her small voice. For a moment, one of the children would reach for the boat, curiosity overcoming caution. Then the mothers would see. They'd rush forward, snatching their children away. "Stay away from her," they'd hiss. Seren would stand there, confused and hurt, the toy boat still extended, not understanding why the other children were pulled away. Alara would appear moments later, scooping her daughter up, and Seren would ask the question that would haunt the next 10 years, "Mama, why they go?" And Alara would carry her home with tears streaming down her face, unable to explain how fear could make good people cruel. By age 6, the isolation had become violent. One afternoon, carrying a lunch basket to her father's workshop, a group of village children spotted her. "There's the demon girl," one boy shouted. They'd surrounded her, and the first stone hit her shoulder. She'd tried to run, the lunch basket falling and spilling. More stones followed. One caught her in the head, and she'd fallen, crying out. Torin had heard her cry. He'd burst from his workshop roaring, and the children scattered in terror. He'd scooped up his crying daughter, blood running from a cut above her eye. "Why do they hate me, Papa?" she'd sobbed into his chest. "What did I do wrong?" Torin had held her, his jaw clenched so tight it ached, and had no answer to give her. Because she'd done nothing wrong. Her only crime was being born different. At age 9, her hair began growing impossibly fast. Alara would cut it on Monday morning, trimming it to shoulder length. By Friday, it would pool on the floor around her feet. Alara would braid it, coil it, wrap it in cloth, but it did no good. "I'm sorry, Mama," Seren would whisper. "I don't try to grow it." And worse, they discovered it glowed at night. When Seren was 11, she'd been reading by her window, so absorbed she'd forgotten to cover her hair. A fisherman walking home late had seen the glow through the window, a child reading by hair that glowed like captured starlight. By morning, the whole village knew. An angry crowd had gathered outside the cottage. "Witchcraft," someone screamed. "She'll bring the curse back." Torin had stood in the doorway with a wood axe, his face dangerous. "Get away from my home," he'd growled. The village guard had to disperse the mob. But what happened next changed everything. Seren, now 12, made a decision that shocked her parents. One evening, after another day of isolation and whispered accusations, she came to them with tears in her eyes but determination on her face. "I'm going to leave," she said quietly. "If they think I'm bringing danger, I'll go. I'll leave Morwen's Bay, and you can stay. You can have your life back." The words hit Torin like a physical blow. He knelt before his daughter, gripping her shoulders. "No," he said, his voice breaking. "Absolutely not. We are a family. We stay together or we leave together. But you are not going anywhere alone." Alara joined them, the three of them holding each other. "We don't want a life without you in it," Alara said fiercely. "The village can accept us all or have none of us. Those are the only options." Seren had wept then, the first time she'd truly broken down in years, and her parents held her while her glowing hair illuminated the cottage like a beacon. "I just want to be normal," she'd cried. "I just want friends. I just want people to not look at me like I'm a monster." Outside, unknown to the family, Oracle Meridwen was walking past. She heard the crying and stopped at their window. What she saw made her close her eyes in pain, a child breaking under the weight of rejection, parents helpless to protect her from an entire community's fear. The Oracle made a decision then. Tomorrow, she would try one more time to make the village understand. One more time to explain what they were too blind to see. But as she walked away into the night, a terrible premonition gripped her heart. She feared it was already too late. The village had made up its mind, and minds shaped by fear were nearly impossible to change. Through it all, Seren found one refuge, her father's workshop. By age 13, she'd become a skilled boat builder, learning at Torin's side in the dusty, wood-scented space where no one else ventured. Her long fingers were perfect for the delicate work of joining planks and sealing seams. They'd work in comfortable silence for hours, the rasp of planes and the tap of hammers the only sounds. During one of these sessions, Seren had suddenly stopped working. "Papa," she'd said quietly. "Do you ever wish I was normal?" Torin had set down his tools immediately. "Look at me, Starlight." She'd raised her eyes to his, and he'd seen years of accumulated pain there. "You are my daughter," he'd said fiercely. "You are your mother's daughter. You are exactly who you're meant to be. The village is full of cowards who fear what they don't understand. That's their failing, not yours. Do you hear me? Not yours." He'd pulled her into a fierce hug, and she'd clung to him. But then Seren found something that changed everything. She discovered she could control her light. It happened by accident. She'd been in the workshop late one evening when a rat had startled her, and her hair had flared brightly, flooding the entire space with silvery light. The rat had fled, but Seren had stood there, shocked, realizing the brightness had responded to her fear. Over the next weeks, she experimented in secret. She could make her hair glow brighter with concentration. She could dim it almost to nothing. And one night, she discovered she could extend the light outward, creating a sphere of radiance around herself. When she showed her parents, Elara had gasped. "Seren, this is a gift." But Torin had looked troubled. "Don't let the village see this," he'd warned. "They already fear what they don't understand. If they see you can control it, can make it stronger." He didn't need to finish. They all understood. This power would terrify Morwen's Bay even more. Then came the blessing of the Boats Festival, Morwen's Bay's biggest celebration, where every fishing boat in the harbor was blessed for the coming season. Seren had watched the preparations with yearning in her eyes. "Please, Mama," she'd begged. "Just this once. I want to feel like I belong." Elara had hesitated, but Torin had agreed. "She's 13 years old. She deserves to attend. We'll be careful." So Elara had spent 2 hours braiding Seren's impossible hair, weaving it over and over on itself, then wrapping the braids in thick cloth, then covering everything with a heavy hooded cloak. "Don't take the hood off," she'd warned. "For any reason." They'd walked to the festival as a family, and for the first hour, everything had been perfect. Seren watched the dancers, listened to the music, saw the lanterns released into the sky. For the first time in her life, she'd felt almost normal, almost part of something larger. Then the drunk young men noticed her. 4 of them, fishermen's sons in their early 20s. "Hey," one called out, slurring. "Who's the mysterious hooded figure?" Torin immediately stepped between them and Seren. "Leave her alone," he'd said quietly, steel in his voice. "Why?" another asked. "What's she hiding? Come on, let's see." The commotion was drawing attention. Other villagers stopped their celebrations, turning to watch. The drunk young men, emboldened by their audience and alcohol, advanced. "Just a peek," one said, reaching for Seren's hood. "No, please," Seren backed away, but there were too many of them. One grabbed her hood from behind and yanked. The fabric tore. The braids began to unravel. And then someone pulled the cloth wrapping free, and Seren's hair spilled out. The harbor fell silent. 400 people stopped breathing at once. Seren's hair tumbled around her in luminescent waves, silver blue light pulsing from each strand, growing brighter with each passing second. But then something happened that no one expected, including Seren herself. Her fear spiked, her newly discovered power responded, and her hair flared brilliant as a star. The light exploded outward in a sphere 30 feet wide, so bright that people had to shield their eyes. For 5 seconds, the entire harbor was bathed in daylight-bright silver radiance. Then Seren, shocked by what she'd done, lost control. The light winked out, and she stood there in the sudden darkness, trembling, her hair still glowing but dimmer now. The look on her face was one of pure devastation and fear. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to. I'm sorry." The silence broke with a scream. "She's dangerous," someone shrieked. "Did you see that? She can weaponize it." The crowd surged backward, then forward, mob mentality taking over. "She'll kill us all," another voice joined in. "The demon reveals itself." Oracle Meridwen pushed through the crowd, desperate. "Stop," she'd cried, placing herself in front of Seren. "You don't understand what you're seeing." But Aldrich the Stern appeared, his face carved from stone. "On the contrary, Oracle. For the first time, we understand completely. That creature has power she can unleash at will. She is a threat." Meridwen spun to face him, fury in her ancient eyes. "She's a frightened child who just discovered her gift. She's your salvation, you fool." But Aldrich simply gestured to the guards. "Take the family into custody. We'll convene the council at dawn." Someone in the crowd had knocked over a lantern. It shattered on the dock, and oil spread, caught fire. Flames licked up a wooden post. "She's trying to burn us," someone screamed, though it had been an accident. "Fire! The demon attacks." The guards formed a protective circle around Torrent's family, escorting them through the hostile crowd while people threw things, rotten vegetables, stones, anything they could grab. Oracle Meridwen walked with them, her staff raised, her voice hoarse from shouting warnings no one would hear. Inside their cottage, with the door barricaded and an angry crowd outside, Alara held Seren while the girl shook with silent sobs. "I'm sorry," Seren kept whispering. "This is all my fault. If I'd just controlled it better." "No," Torrent said firmly, kneeling before her. "You did nothing wrong. You were startled. You reacted. That's human. That's normal. They're the ones who are wrong." The emergency council session began at dawn. Torrent, Alara, and Seren stood in the center of the Elder Hall like criminals on trial, surrounded by hostile faces. Aldrich the Stern presided. "We are here," he announced, "to decide the fate of this family and the unnatural child they harbor." The room erupted in shouts. "Cast them out," someone screamed. "Banish them before she kills us all." Aldrich raised his hand for silence. "The charges are clear. The child possesses dangerous, unnatural powers. She can unleash blinding light at will. She is a threat to this community." Torrent stepped forward, his fists clenched. "She's a frightened girl who was attacked." "She didn't mean to." "Intent doesn't matter," Aldrich interrupted coldly. "Capability does. She has power. Power that could harm us. That's enough." Then Alara did something unexpected. She stepped forward, her voice cutting through the noise. "You want to talk about harm?" she said, her voice shaking with fury she'd suppressed for 13 years. "Let's talk about harm. My daughter has been stoned by your children. She's been cursed at, spat on, isolated, and tormented since the day she was born. She's never had a friend. She's never been invited to play. She's never known what it's like to be accepted. And through all of it, she's never once struck back. Never once used her gift to hurt anyone, even when she had every reason to." Alara's voice rose, tears streaming down her face. "You want to talk about who's dangerous? Look in a mirror. You've spent 13 years trying to destroy a child whose only crime was being born different. And you dare, call her a threat?" The hall fell silent. Some faces showed shame. Others remained hard. Then Oracle Meridwen stepped forward, and when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of 4 decades of spiritual authority. "Listen to me. All of you. 13 years ago, we were dying. The shadow plague had taken 52 of our people. Every evening, we hid in terror. Then this child was born, and 7 days later, 7 days, the curse lifted." She paused, letting that sink in. "For 13 years, not a single shadow has appeared. Not one person has vanished. And you want to know why?" She pointed at Seren. "Because of her. That light you fear? It's protective light. Every night while you sleep safely, her presence creates a barrier the shadows cannot cross. She is the answer to every prayer we made in our darkest hours." The hall erupted in argument. Some people looked uncertain, doing the math in their heads. But Aldrich's voice cut through. "Coincidence," he said flatly. The curse ran its course. Meridwen turned on him, decades of patience burned away. You fool. She was born after 13 months because the gods were preparing her. Her hair is woven from light and shadow because she stands between the worlds. If you cast her out, the shadows will return. I promise you this on everything I hold sacred, send away your guardian, and doom will follow. Aldrich looked at her with something like pity. Oracle Meridwen, age has made you sentimental. You've developed an attachment that clouds your judgment. He turned to the council. All in favor of permanent banishment? 47 hands rose. Opposed? Only 3 hands remained up, Meridwen's and 2 elderly council members. The decision is made. The family will leave by dawn tomorrow. Torrhen stood, his whole body shaking with barely contained fury. But before he could speak, Seren stepped forward. At 13 years old, she looked small and fragile, but her voice was clear. I have something to say. The hall quieted, shocked that she was speaking. Seren looked around at the faces of people she'd known her entire life. You're afraid of me because I'm different. Because I can do things you don't understand. But I want you to know something. She paused, gathering courage. I forgive you. The words hung in the air, stunning in their simplicity. I forgive you for the stones. For the names. For the loneliness. For teaching your children to hate me. I forgive you because I understand fear. I've lived with it my whole life, the fear that I really am what you say I am. A monster. A curse. Tears streamed down her face now. But Oracle Meridwen is right. I am your guardian, whether you want me to be or not. And even though you're sending me away, even though you've made my life. Her voice broke. Even though you've hurt me more than I can say, I want you to know that I would have protected you forever. I would have stood between you and darkness for the rest of my life. Because that's what guardians do. She looked directly at Aldrich. You're making a choice you can't undo. And when you realize your mistake, and you will, please remember that I offered you forgiveness before you even knew you needed it. Then she turned and walked out of the elder hall, her parents following, and the entire room sat in stunned silence, her words echoing in the suddenly quiet space. One person began to weep, Grandmother Bissett, who remembered the old ways. Then another. Then another. But not enough. Never enough. The decision stood. That night, the family packed what they could carry. Oracle Meridwen came to visit, bringing her enchanted compass and her life savings. She knelt before Seren one last time. You are precious beyond all measure, she said, taking the girl's hands. Never forget that. And remember, this light of yours is a gift. One day, you'll find people who recognize that. Who celebrate it instead of fearing it. She stood, embracing each of them. Go north. Find the village of Highcrest. Tell them Oracle Meridwen sent you. They're good people there. At the door, she turned back. The gods will judge what happens next. And I fear their judgment will be harsh. Dawn came too quickly. As they loaded their cart, villagers gathered to watch. Not to say goodbye, to ensure they left. Torrhen pulled the cart, Alara held Seren's hand, and they walked down the main street one last time. The silence was absolute. 400 people watching, not one speaking. The baker looked away, ashamed. The fishermen stood with arms crossed. The mothers clutched their children. Only one old fisherman, Marcus, removed his cap respectfully. They reached the village boundary. Torrhen turned back one last time. Remember this moment, he said, his voice carrying. Remember that you chose this. And when the consequences come, and they will, remember that you were warned. Then they crossed the boundary and disappeared north, and Morwen's Bay returned to its daily life, relieved the danger was gone, secure in their righteousness. That evening, at exactly 6:47, the warning bell tolled for the first time in 13 years. People froze, confused. Who rang the bell? Someone asked. No one had. The bell was swinging on its own. Get inside, someone screamed. People scattered, and that's when the tide pools began to darken. All of them, simultaneously, the water turning black. And from that blackness, they rose. The shadow dwellers. But different, larger, faster, hungrier. They poured from the tide pools like smoke given form, dozens of them, maybe hundreds. They flowed through the streets, searching, hunting, ravenous after 13 years of being held back. The first person taken was Martin the baker. He'd been too slow closing his shop, and a shadow wrapped around him. He opened his mouth to scream, but the sound cut off as he simply ceased to exist, his clothes falling in a heap. His daughter screamed from inside as she watched her father vanish. The shadows were everywhere, moving faster than before, as if their long absence had made them desperate. In the market square, a family of 5 tried to run for home. The shadows took the mother first, then the father, then 3 children in quick succession. The oldest boy made it to the door, his hand touching the handle, before darkness engulfed him. In residential streets, old Jensen was taken from his garden. Grandmother beset, waiting peacefully on her porch, she'd known this would happen. Young Marcus, trying to help an elderly neighbor. And Aldrich the Stern, in the elder hall, finally understanding. His last words, as shadow wrapped around him, "We were wrong. Gods forgive us, we were wrong." Then he was gone. The shadows hunted for exactly 1 hour. When they retreated, 43 people had vanished. 43 piles of empty clothes. In one evening, nearly as many taken as in 3 entire years of the original curse. The survivors emerged slowly, counting the missing. The horror settled over them like a shroud, not just the loss, but the meaning. The timing. The curse had returned the very day they'd banished the strange child. By dawn, the acting council called an emergency session. Oracle Meridwen was already there, aged a decade overnight. She walked to the front, and the look in her eyes made strong men flinch. "You want to understand?" she asked, her voice soft and terrible. "Very well." She explained it all, how Seren was prepared for 13 months, how her hair was woven from light and shadow to stand between worlds, how her presence created a barrier the shadows couldn't cross. Every night for 13 years, that child's light protected you. And the very moment, she crossed the village boundary, the barrier fell. She slammed her staff on the ground. 43 people are dead because you were too afraid, too small-minded, too cruel to see the blessing standing right in front of you. Teresa, the acting headwoman, spoke up, her voice barely a whisper. "Can we bring them back? The family? Can we convince them to return?" Meridwen looked at her with something between pity and contempt. "You exiled them. You terrorized their daughter for 13 years. You threw stones at a child. And now you want them to come back and save you?" She laughed bitterly. "Tell me, would you return to people who treated you that way? Would you use your gift to protect people who tried to destroy you?" The silence was answer enough. Another council member spoke desperately. "We could send searchers. Offer them anything," but Meridwen cut him off. "And even if they did return, which they won't, why should they save you? That child offered you forgiveness yesterday. Forgiveness before you even knew you needed it. And you still sent her away. You don't deserve her protection." She looked around one last time, then removed her ceremonial necklace. "I've served Morwen's Bay for 40 years. I've guided you through storms and famine and disease. But I cannot guide you through your own cruelty." She turned toward the door. "Find another oracle. One who can stomach watching good people destroy themselves out of fear. I'm done." Despite everything, despite Oracle Meridwen's words, the village had to try. Search parties were organized within hours. Thomas, the bell ringer, led the first group. "We find them, we beg forgiveness, we bring them home," he said grimly. The first week, they followed the coastal road north, asking everywhere, "Have you seen a boat builder, a sailmaker, and a girl with strange hair?" No one had seen them. The second week, they pushed into the mountains. On the 8th day, they found something, a campsite, recently used. The ashes were still warm. "They're alive," Thomas reported back. "They came this way." But then the trail split at a crossroads where 3 paths diverged. The search parties split up, but the trails grew cold. One group found a single strand of hair caught on a branch, silver and black twisted together, unmistakably Seren's. But beyond that, nothing. One searcher, David, reported something strange. I heard singing. A girl's voice, clear and beautiful, singing in the old tongue. I followed it deep into the forest. But when I reached where it was coming from, there was nothing. Just trees. But I swear she was there. Others reported similar experiences, glimpses of light that vanished when approached, the sound of laughter echoing with no source, the sensation of being watched. Were these signs of Seren? Or desperate imaginings of guilty searchers? By the third week, the search parties returned empty-handed and exhausted. They're gone, Thomas reported, defeat written across his face. We searched everywhere. Either they traveled impossibly fast, or he couldn't finish. Or what? Teresa pressed. Or something found them on the road. They had no protection out there. Wild animals, bandits, or perhaps the shadows hunt beyond Morwen's Bay now. After 4 weeks of searching with no results, the council made the difficult decision. We can't sustain this anymore, Teresa said heavily. Every person searching is another person not working to keep the village alive. We need everyone here if we're going to survive. The search was ended. The family was declared lost, their fate unknown. The months that followed were a slow descent into nightmare. The shadows returned every evening at 6:47, and steadily, inexorably, Morwen's Bay's population dwindled. The census board told the grim story: population at banishment, 400. Lost to original curse, 52. Lost night of return, 43. By 3 months after, 73 more gone. By 6 months, 89. The numbers kept climbing. Some families fled to other villages. Others stayed, too poor to leave or perhaps feeling they deserved this punishment. The fishing industry collapsed. The market operated only until early afternoon. Shops closed permanently. Houses stood empty. Children were evacuated to distant relatives. Morwen's Bay became a village of adults waiting to die. 8 months after the banishment, fewer than 140 people remained. The Elder Hall stood mostly empty, its windows broken. Oracle's necklace still lay on the council table, dusty and unclaimed. The harbor was a graveyard of rotting boats. Wild grass grew in the market square. The survivors moved through their days like ghosts, hollow-eyed and exhausted. Every evening at 6:30, the frantic rush indoors would begin. Then the bell would toll at 6:47, and the hunting would begin. In the morning, more empty clothes would be found in the streets. The baker who'd blamed Seren sat alone in his shop, his daughter sent away, his wife taken. He'd stopped baking. He'd spend hours staring at his wife's empty dress, whispering apologies. I was wrong. Forgive me. Old Jensen, before he was taken, had carved words into his cottage wall: the girl was innocent. I killed us all with my fear. Gods forgive me. His cottage stood empty now, those words visible through the open door, a confession carved in wood. 1 year after the banishment, fewer than 100 survivors gathered in the market square on the anniversary. They stood in silence, looking at each other, at the empty buildings, at the wild grass reclaiming their streets. They'd destroyed themselves. Not with weapons or plague or disaster, but with their own fear and cruelty. They'd been given a miracle and called it a curse. As the sun began to set, Thomas climbed the bell tower one last time. At 6:47, he rang the bell manually, pulling with all his strength. And as he rang it, tears streaming down his face, he screamed into the gathering darkness, "We're sorry. Seren, wherever you are, we're sorry. Forgive us." But the only answer was the rising of the shadows from the tide pools, the familiar darkness spreading through the streets. His apology, like all the others, disappeared into the wind, unheard by the family that was long gone. But what of that family? What happened to Torin, Alara, and Seren after they crossed that boundary and disappeared into the mountains? Here is what travelers say, what merchants whisper, what has become legend in the north. They say the family traveled for 3 weeks, following Oracle Meridwen's compass north through mountain passes and forest paths. They were cautious, sleeping in hidden places, moving before dawn. Torrin was vigilant, Alara was strong, and Seren was learning what her light could really do. On the fourth night of their journey, they were attacked by bandits. 5 men, armed with knives, emerging from the trees as the family made camp. "Well, what do we have here?" the leader had said, grinning. "A family with a cart full of goods and no guards." Torrin had stepped forward, positioning himself between the bandits and his family. "We have nothing of value. Just tools and clothes. Let us pass." The bandit leader had laughed. "We'll be the judge of," he'd stopped mid-sentence because Seren had stepped out from behind her mother, and her hair was uncovered, glowing in the gathering darkness. "What in the—" one bandit had breathed. The leader recovered quickly. "Even better. Exotic goods. We can sell that girl for a fortune too," he never finished. Seren had closed her eyes, concentrated, and her light had exploded outward in a sphere 50 feet wide, brighter than she'd ever made it. The bandits had screamed, covering their eyes, stumbling backward in pain and terror. "Go," Seren had said quietly, her voice somehow carrying despite the chaos. "Leave us alone, or I will make it brighter until you go blind." The bandits had fled, crashing through the underbrush, their screams fading into the distance. When they were gone, Seren had dimmed her light and turned to her parents, her face pale. "I didn't hurt them," she'd said quickly. "Just scared them." Was that okay?" Torrin had pulled her into his arms. "You protected us. You controlled it perfectly. You didn't cause harm, just defended. That's more than okay, Starlight. That's heroic." From that night on, they traveled more confidently. Seren's light kept predators away, wolves would retreat when they saw the glow. Dangerous paths became safe because she could illuminate them completely. And when they finally reached the village of Highcrest, nestled in a valley between 2 mountains, they were exhausted but alive. The village elder, a woman named Marta, had welcomed them without question. She'd taken one look at their worn faces, at Seren's unusual hair, and smiled. "You look like people who've traveled far from cruelty," she'd said simply. "There's no cruelty here. Only work, community, and acceptance. Stay if you wish." They'd stayed. In Highcrest, something miraculous happened. Seren made friends. The first was a boy named Finn, 2 years older than her, who worked in his father's forge. He'd seen Seren's hair on her first day in the village and had walked right up to her. "That's the most amazing thing I've ever seen," he'd said bluntly. "Does it always glow?" Seren had tensed, waiting for mockery or fear. But Finn had just looked curious. "Sometimes," she'd answered cautiously. "Can you control it? Like make it brighter or dimmer?" "Yes." "That's incredible. Can you show me?" And just like that, simply, easily, Seren had her first friend. Finn had introduced her to others, Emma, who was fascinated by Seren's hair and wanted to learn how to braid it in complex patterns. Lucas, who was studying to be a healer and was interested in understanding how her light worked. Maria, who just thought Seren seemed nice and wanted to be friends. For the first time in her life, Seren experienced what it was like to be accepted. To be valued for who she was, not despite her differences but including them. Torrin built boats that were renowned throughout the region. Alara made sails that were works of art. And Seren discovered her purpose. 6 months after they arrived in Highcrest, a neighboring village sent messengers in desperate need. Shadow creatures had appeared in their village, not as powerful as those in Morwen's Bay, but deadly nonetheless. 2 people had been taken. The village was terrified. Marta had looked at Seren thoughtfully. "I think," she'd said gently, "this might be something you could help with. But only if you want to. No one will force you." Seren had looked at her parents. Torrin had cupped her face in his hands. "Whatever you decide, we support you. But remember, you are not defined by what you can do for others. You have worth just by existing." Alara had nodded. "But if you want to help, if you feel called to use your gift, we'll be proud of you. The choice is yours." Seren had chosen to help. She'd traveled to the neighboring village with a group from Highcrest. When evening came and the shadows appeared, Seren had stood in the village square, closed her eyes, and let her light blaze. The sphere of protection extended 100 feet in every direction, brighter than moonlight, steady and strong. She'd maintained it all night, and by morning, the shadow creatures had retreated. The village had been saved. Word spread. Other villages heard about the girl with the glowing hair who could stand against darkness. They called her the Light-Bearer. Over the next years, Seren traveled throughout the mountain region, always with companions from Highcrest, always by choice. She saved village after village, protected family after family. And each time, she was thanked, celebrated, appreciated. She never asked for payment, but communities gave gifts anyway, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Torin and Alara's home became a gathering place for grateful families who'd been saved by their daughter. By the time Seren turned 16, she'd saved 23 villages and countless lives. She'd grown into a confident young woman who understood her purpose and embraced her gift. She had friends, community, and most importantly, she knew her worth. One evening, as she sat with her parents in their comfortable home in Highcrest, Alara asked the question they'd all been thinking. "Do you ever think about going back? To Morwen's Bay?" Seren was quiet for a long moment. "I think about it," she admitted. "I wonder if they're okay. If they figured out what happened. Part of me wants to know." "And if we went back?" Torin asked carefully. "If they begged you to save them?" Seren looked at her father, her silver-black hair glowing softly in the firelight, and smiled, a smile that held both sadness and peace. "I would ask them a question first. Why should I save people who tried to destroy me? Not for revenge," she continued. "But because that's the question they need to answer. Why should anyone protect those who show only cruelty? What have they done to deserve protection?" She paused. "The villages I save now, they welcome me. They thank me. They see me as a blessing. That's the difference. They're willing to receive help, to acknowledge they need it, to be grateful for it. But if they truly learned?" Alara pressed. "If they truly understood their mistake and had changed?" Seren considered. "Then maybe. But change isn't just saying sorry. It's being different. Acting different. Treating people different. Until I see evidence of real change, not just desperate need, Morwen's Bay will have to face the consequences of their choice." She looked at both her parents. "I forgave them, and I meant it. But forgiveness doesn't mean going back into a situation that hurt me. It means releasing the anger so I can move forward. And I have moved forward. I've found my place. My people. My purpose." Torin had pulled her close, pride shining in his eyes. "You've become exactly who you were meant to be. Not despite what Morwen's Bay did to you, but perhaps because of it. You learned compassion by experiencing cruelty. You learned the value of acceptance by experiencing rejection. You learned your strength by being tested. And," Alara added softly, "you learned that your worth isn't determined by whether others can see it. It's inherent. It's unchanging. It's there whether anyone acknowledges it or not." Seren had nodded, tears in her eyes but smiling. "Morwen's Bay tried to destroy me. Instead, they freed me to find where I really belonged. That's the story the travelers tell. That's the legend that's grown in the northern mountains. Whether every detail is true, no one can say for certain. But this much is known, there is a woman in the north called the Light-Bearer, who stands between darkness and dawn, who protects those who need protecting, who has saved countless lives with her gift." "And Morwen's Bay? The village that rejected her?" "Travelers avoid it now. The last resident left 3 years after the Guardian's exile. The village became a ghost town, a cautionary tale, a place where shadows still emerge every evening at 6:47, hunting through empty streets for prey that no longer exists. The curse continues long after there's anyone left to curse, a testament to the permanence of consequences, the way our choices echo long after we're gone." Anthropologists visit occasionally, finding the census board with its grim accounting, the piles of empty clothes in the elder hall, Grandmother Bissette's warnings carved into walls, Oracle Meridwen's journal with its final damning entry. They chose fear over faith, comfort over courage, destruction over protection. Morwen's Bay is dead. Not because of shadows, but because of fear. If you've made it this far in this journey, we want to hear from you. What do you think happened to Seren? Do you think she should have gone back to save Morwen's Bay? Have you ever been rejected for being different, and how did you find your place? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And please, if this story moved you, hit that subscribe button. These stories matter, and your support helps us keep telling them. The lesson is simple but profound: blessings don't always come in expected forms. Miracles don't always look like we imagine. Guardians might have silver hair that glows in the dark, born after 13 months, strange and challenging and uncomfortable. When they arrive, we have a choice. We can embrace them, protect them, cherish them for the gifts they are. Or we can reject them, destroy them, drive them away in our fear. But if we choose rejection, we must be prepared to live with the consequences. Because the universe doesn't send backup miracles. When you drive away your guardian, you don't get another one. When you destroy your blessing, you don't get a replacement. You get exactly what you chose. Morwen's Bay chose fear. They chose to destroy rather than understand. And they got exactly what they chose: darkness, death, and the slow extinction of a community that couldn't see past its own terror. But there's hope in this story too. Because Seren survived. She thrived. She found people who could see her worth, who celebrated her differences instead of fearing them, who understood that strange doesn't mean dangerous, that different doesn't mean wrong. She found her purpose and her peace. And perhaps that's the real ending, not Morwen's Bay's destruction, but Seren's liberation. She was freed from the burden of trying to earn love from people who couldn't give it. She found love that was freely given, acceptance that didn't require her to change, a community that said, "You are enough exactly as you are." Sometimes the greatest gift rejection gives us is the freedom to find where we truly belong. Morwen's Bay couldn't see Seren's light. But Highcrest could. Morwen's Bay called her a curse. But 23 villages call her a savior. Morwen's Bay tried to destroy her. But instead, they set her free to become who she was always meant to be. The story asks us, what will we choose? When the strange child is born, when the guardian arrives in unexpected form, when the miracle challenges our understanding, will we have the courage to embrace it? Will we have the wisdom to protect it? Will we have the compassion to love it, even when it frightens us? Or will we make Morwen's Bay's mistake? Will we drive away our salvation because it doesn't look how we expected? Will we destroy our miracles because they don't fit our comfortable categories? The shadows are always waiting. The darkness is always hungry. The only question is whether we'll protect the light when it appears, or whether we'll snuff it out with our own frightened hands and then wonder why darkness falls. Morwen's Bay wondered. They understood too late. They saw their mistake when it was far too late to fix it. Let their story be a warning. Let their fate be a lesson. Let their darkness remind us to protect the light, even when that light looks strange, even when it challenges us, even when it asks us to be braver and kinder and more accepting than we think we can be. Because in the end, that's what guardians do, they challenge us to be better. They stand between us and darkness, but only if we're wise enough to let them. Only if we're brave enough to see past fear to blessing. Only if we're kind enough to protect what's different instead of destroying it. Morwen's Bay failed that test catastrophically. But Seren passed hers with grace. She survived. She flourished. She found her light, her purpose, her people. And in the end, perhaps that's the real miracle, not that she saved villages, but that she saved herself. That she refused to let cruelty define her, refused to let rejection diminish her, refused to let fear extinguish her light. She became exactly who she was meant to be, not for Morwen's Bay's sake, but for her own. And that, ultimately, is the greatest victory of all. May we all be brave enough to protect our light and wise enough to recognize when others need us to protect theirs. May we choose courage over fear, acceptance over rejection, love over all. This is the lesson of the silver-haired guardian. This is the truth that echoes from Morwen's Bay's empty streets and from Highcrest's thriving community. The choice is always ours. Choose wisely. Thank you for joining us on this journey through one of the most powerful tales in our collection. If this story resonated with you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment about what Seren's story means to you. And subscribe to African folklore stories so you never miss the lessons these ancient tales have to teach us. Until next time, may you always recognize the guardians in your life, and may you always choose light over darkness. Thank you for listening.